They taught you to speak but never how to be heard, to smile but never how to survive. So you learned silence. You learned to swallow pain and call it strength. Every day you carry a version of yourself that no one sees, no one touches, no one saves. You sit among people and still feel invisible because your identity was shaped by rejection, not choice. Your fears were trained into you slowly, through shame, comparison, and subtle humiliation. You were conditioned to doubt your instincts, to seek approval, to explain your existence. Loneliness didn't arrive loudly. It crept in through small moments of neglect, unreturned respect, and unspoken grief. Over time, you stopped reacting not because you were calm, but because you were tired of bleeding in public. The world taught you that emotions are weaknesses to be exploited, and vulnerability is a currency others spend against you. So you hardened. You became distant, cold, observant, not because you wanted power, but because power was the only language pain respected. And now, in the quiet, you feel it, the tension between who you are and who you were forced to become. That fracture is where truth begins. Silence is not calm. It is not acceptance. It is not peace. Silence is the moment the mind decides that speaking is no longer worth the cost. It is the instant when expression becomes danger and reaction becomes weakness. Silence is born when pain repeats itself long enough to teach restraint. It grows when every attempt to explain is met with indifference, dismissal, or subtle humiliation. And eventually, silence becomes identity. You stop reacting not because you understand, but because you have learned that reaction gives others leverage. Every word becomes a potential weapon in their hands. Every emotion becomes an exposed nerve. So you begin to close doors inside yourself. Slowly, quietly, without ceremony. And the world mistakes this withdrawal for stability, for maturity, for strength, never realizing that beneath it lies a controlled threat, a compressed force, a tension waiting for its moment. You discover early that noise attracts predators. The loud are noticed, judged, categorized, attacked. The silent remain undefined. Undefined people cannot be easily controlled. When you stop explaining, you deny others the information they need to predict you. When you stop reacting, you remove their ability to measure your weakness. This is not passive. It is strategic invisibility. Silence is the decision to become unreadable in a world obsessed with interpretation. It is psychological camouflage. The quieter you become, the harder it is for others to place you. And when they cannot place you, they cannot control you. Most people believe silence is surrender. They are wrong. Silence is pressure. It creates discomfort. Humans fear uncertainty more than hostility. An enemy who shouts reveals their position. An enemy who stays silent forces constant vigilance. The mind begins to fill the empty space with projections, suspicions, anxiety. Silence becomes a mirror where others confront their own insecurities. They wonder what you are thinking. They wonder what you know. They wonder if you see through them. And in that wondering, they lose balance. Silence destabilizes. It unrounds. It unsettles. You begin to notice how quickly people betray themselves in the presence of quiet. They overtalk. They overshare. They justify. They explain. They expose motives they never intended to reveal. The silent observer collects patterns, studies rhythms, maps emotional triggers. While others seek to be understood, the silent one seeks to understand. And understanding is the foundation of power. When you know how a person reacts under pressure, how they respond to discomfort, how they rationalize their fears, you gain access to their psychological blueprint. Silence grants you that access. This is why controlled silence feels dangerous. It removes the emotional cues people rely on to feel safe. No reassurance, no visible anger, no visible fear, just neutrality, just stillness. And in that stillness, people project worst-case scenarios. They assume calculation. They assume strategy. They assume intent. And sometimes, assumption alone is enough to establish dominance. You do not need to threaten when your presence already creates tension. You do not need to intimidate when your quiet observation unsettles more than aggression ever could. But silence is not just a weapon against others. It is a battleground within. To remain silent when the body wants to scream requires discipline. To remain silent when ego demands recognition requires control. To remain silent when misunderstood requires psychological endurance. Each moment of restraint strengthens emotional insulation. You become less reactive, less impulsive, less predictable. Over time, emotions lose their grip. You begin to feel them without obeying them. You watch anger rise, peak, and dissolve without action. You witness fear appear and fade without surrender. This internal mastery creates an aura others can sense but cannot define. They feel the weight of your presence without understanding its source. Yet silence carries a price. It isolates. It distances. It separates you from those who still need to explain, to vent, to justify. Conversations become shallow. Relationships become observational rather than emotional. You stand among people but remain untouched by them. This emotional distance sharpens perception but dulls connection. And in that space, loneliness evolves. Not the loud loneliness of abandonment, but the quiet loneliness of awareness. You begin to see human behavior as pattern rather than personality. You predict reactions before they occur. You anticipate betrayals before they unfold. Nothing surprises you. And when nothing surprises you, nothing excites you either. Silence creates superiority and alienation at the same time. You stand above emotional chaos, but below emotional warmth. You gain clarity but lose innocence. You understand power but sacrifice comfort. This is the hidden cost. The mind grows sharper while the heart grows colder. And once this shift happens, reversal becomes impossible. You cannot unsee manipulation. You cannot unknow psychological mechanics. You cannot return to naive expression after mastering restraint. The door closes behind you quietly without warning. The world rewards noise but fears silence. Loud ambition attracts competition. Silent ambition creates unease. Loud confidence invites challenge. Silent confidence commands caution. Silence is interpreted as depth, and depth is always assumed to contain danger. This assumption works in your favor. You become underestimated and overfeared simultaneously. People do not know whether to approach or avoid you, so they hesitate, and hesitation is vulnerability. Eventually, silence stops being a strategy and becomes instinct. You no longer choose it. It chooses you. You speak less, react slower, observe longer. Your presence shifts. Your energy changes. People adjust their tone around you, their posture, their words. They sense the weight of your awareness. They feel evaluated, and that feeling makes them reveal more than they intend. Silence turns you into a psychological gravity well. Others orbit. You remain still. But within this stillness, something begins to fracture. The human need for expression does not disappear. It compresses. Emotions unexpressed do not dissolve. They accumulate. They build pressure. They sink into the subconscious. And over time, this pressure demands release. When silence finally breaks, it does not do so gently. It erupts. It shatters. It devastates. Years of restraint collapse into moments of irreversible consequence. This is why silence is dangerous not only to others but to the self. Controlled threat eventually seeks expression. The question is never whether silence holds power. It always does. The question is how long you can contain what you refuse to release. Because every silent mind carries a storm behind its calm. And storms do not remain dormant forever. The collapse begins quietly, in moments so small they barely register, in glances that linger a second too long, in silences that stretch just enough to make you question your worth, in laughter that feels slightly delayed, in compliments that sound conditional, in approval that arrives only after performance. At first, you do not notice the shift. You tell yourself you are adapting, evolving, becoming socially aware. But slowly, something inside you starts negotiating its existence. You begin to calculate how you speak, how you move, how you look, how you feel, and most dangerously, how you think. You start filtering instinct through expectation. You adjust tone to fit rooms. You soften truths to avoid tension. You mask doubts to avoid exclusion. And in this constant adjustment, identity begins to fracture. You stop being a self. You become a response. Every action becomes a question. Every choice becomes a gamble. Will this be accepted? Will this be rejected? Will this be enough? Approval does not announce itself as a threat. It arrives disguised as belonging. It promises safety, connection, recognition. It whispers that if you just align, just perform, just please, you will finally be seen. But the moment approval becomes necessary for emotional survival, it transforms into a leash. And you do not feel the restraint immediately. You feel relief. Relief that you are no longer alone. Relief that you are no longer invisible. Relief that your existence is acknowledged. And that relief becomes addictive. It becomes the emotional oxygen you breathe. Without it, anxiety rises. Doubt thickens. Fear expands. You begin to crave validation the way the starving crave food. Not because you are weak, but because human connection has been weaponized against your sense of self. This is how identity collapses. Not through destruction, but through substitution. Your authentic impulses are replaced by acceptable behaviors. Your real opinions are replaced by strategic silence. Your natural emotional responses are replaced by rehearsed reactions. You start performing a version of yourself that earns social safety. Over time, that performance becomes habit. Habit becomes character. And character becomes prison. You forget the sound of your own voice when no one is listening. You forget the shape of your own thoughts when no one is judging. You forget what it feels like to exist without an audience. The tragedy is not that you change. Change is inevitable. The tragedy is that you stop choosing who you become. Approval chooses for you. Every environment becomes a test. Every relationship becomes a negotiation. You scan faces for cues. You read micro-expressions. You adjust mid-sentence. You calibrate emotional output. You monitor yourself constantly. And in this constant surveillance, spontaneity dies. Freedom suffocates. The mind becomes a courtroom where every thought is tried before it is allowed to exist. You do not speak to express. You speak to survive. This survival mechanism is invisible to most. They call it social intelligence, emotional awareness, adaptability. They praise it. They reward it. But beneath the polished surface lies psychological erosion, because the self cannot endure endless fragmentation. Each time you suppress instinct to gain acceptance, a small fracture forms. Each time you betray your inner truth to avoid discomfort, another fracture appears. Over time, these fractures multiply, and one day you wake up unable to answer a simple question. Who are you? Not your role, not your title, not your social identity, but you. The raw consciousness behind the performance. Most never find the answer. They spend entire lives chasing reflections of themselves in the eyes of others. They become mirrors. They adapt so well that they disappear. They are everywhere and nowhere, loved and unknown, accepted and empty. They mistake recognition for connection. They mistake applause for understanding. They mistake approval for love. And in doing so, they surrender the only thing that ever belonged to them, their identity. The need for approval begins early. Childhood teaches obedience. School teaches comparison. Society teaches performance. By the time adulthood arrives, the conditioning is complete. You have learned that worth is measured externally, that success is visible, that value must be proven. You have learned to compete for attention, validation, relevance. You have learned that silence means irrelevance, that difference invites rejection, that standing apart risks isolation. And so you align, you conform, you blend, you compress your edges. You round your sharpness. You dim your intensity. You dilute your truth. all to remain acceptable. But acceptance is a moving target. What pleases one group offends another. What earns praise today invites ridicule tomorrow. Trends shift, norms mutate, standards evolve. And in this instability, the approval seeker becomes a chameleon trapped in constant transformation. There is no rest, no arrival, no final state of being enough. Just endless adjustment, endless recalibration, endless self-erasure. The mind begins to fracture under this pressure. Anxiety emerges, not fear of danger but fear of disapproval, fear of exclusion, fear of invisibility. You become hyper-aware of social dynamics. You analyze interactions long after they end. You replay conversations. You dissect tone. You search for signs of rejection. You interpret neutrality as threat, silence as judgment, distance as abandonment, and slowly your inner world becomes hostile, a place of constant self-surveillance and relentless self-critique. This is how approval transforms into psychological domination. Others no longer need to control you. You do it yourself. You police your own thoughts. You censor your own emotions. You discipline your own desires. You become both prisoner and guard. And the cage feels invisible because it is built from your own need to belong. Yet the deeper tragedy lies beneath this mental architecture. When approval becomes survival, relationships lose authenticity. Every interaction becomes transactional. You give to receive. You perform to be valued. You please to be included. Even intimacy becomes conditional. You show only the parts of yourself that attract affection. You hide the parts that risk rejection. And in this selective exposure, true connection becomes impossible. No one knows you. They only know your performance. And because they never see your unfiltered self, you never feel fully seen. Surrounded by people, you remain profoundly alone. This loneliness is not the absence of others. It is the absence of being known. It is the ache of invisibility beneath attention. It is the exhaustion of constant performance. It is the quiet grief of self-betrayal. You sense the distance between who you are and who you present. And that distance grows. It becomes a canyon, a psychological void you attempt to fill with more approval, more success, more recognition. But nothing fills it, because the void is not external. It is internal. It is the space left by the self you abandoned. Power dynamics emerge naturally from this collapse. Those who crave approval become predictable. Their desires are visible. Their fears are exposed. Their boundaries are flexible. They can be guided, influenced, manipulated, not through force but through validation. A compliment steers them. A cold shoulder disciplines them. A moment of praise controls them. Their emotional dependence becomes a lever others can pull. And most never realize it. They believe they are choosing. They believe they are acting freely. But every decision is filtered through the question, will this keep me accepted? Those who understand this dynamic exploit it. Not always consciously. Sometimes instinctively. They reward compliance. They punish deviation. They create environments where approval is scarce and conditional. Scarcity intensifies desire. Conditionality deepens dependency. And dependency breeds obedience. Entire social structures operate on this principle. Corporations, institutions, communities, even families. Approval becomes currency, and identity becomes collateral. You begin to notice how often people betray themselves to remain liked. They laugh at jokes that wound them. They agree with opinions that disgust them. They tolerate disrespect to preserve access. They silence discomfort to maintain harmony. They sacrifice authenticity for safety. And each sacrifice leaves a mark. A scar invisible to the eye but heavy on the psyche. Over time these scars accumulate. They weigh down the spirit. They erode self-respect. They corrode inner authority. The most devastating aspect is that approval-seeking feels like strength. It masquerades as social skill, emotional intelligence, adaptability. It earns rewards, It builds networks. It creates opportunity. And yet, beneath the external success lies internal fragility, a constant fear of loss, a perpetual hunger for validation, a restless need to be affirmed. The approval-dependent mind can never rest. It is always scanning, adjusting, performing. And performance, no matter how refined, is always exhausting. Eventually, exhaustion becomes emptiness. The applause fades. The praise loses impact. Compliments no longer satisfy. You need more, louder, stronger, faster. And still the void remains. Because no amount of external recognition can restore a self that was never allowed to exist. You become addicted to validation, yet numb to its effects. You crave connection, yet avoid exposure. You desire intimacy, yet fear rejection. And in this paradox, psychological tension reaches unbearable levels. Some respond by intensifying the performance. They become louder, more charismatic, more accomplished, more visible. They chase admiration with ferocity. Others withdraw. They detach. They numb. They isolate. They convince themselves they do not need anyone. Both paths stem from the same wound, the same collapse, the same abandonment of self. In rare moments of solitude, fragments of the original identity resurface. Unfiltered thoughts, unapproved desires, unacceptable emotions. They whisper, they disturb, they create discomfort. And because they threaten the constructed persona, they are quickly silenced, buried, rationalized away. But they never disappear. They linger beneath consciousness, waiting for space, waiting for expression. And when life strips away the performance through loss, failure, or isolation, these buried fragments surge forward with overwhelming force. The collapse becomes visible. The mask cracks, and the individual confronts the terrifying question, without approval, who am I? Most are unprepared for the answer, because there is no answer. Only absence, only confusion, only grief. The self was traded for belonging, and belonging was never permanent. It was conditional, temporary, fragile. When it dissolves, nothing remains to support identity. The person feels hollow, directionless, lost. Not because they failed, but because they never built a foundation independent of external validation. This is the hidden catastrophe of modern existence. A civilization built on visibility, metrics, and social recognition creates individuals who measure worth externally. Social platforms quantify approval. Numbers replace nuance. Likes replace connection. Attention replaces understanding. And identity becomes a brand rather than a being. The self is packaged, optimized, curated. And slowly, the distance between image and reality grows unbearable. People live inside projections of themselves, chasing versions they can never inhabit. In this environment, authenticity becomes dangerous. To be real risks exclusion. To be different risks isolation. To stand apart risks invisibility. And so conformity reigns. Emotional safety is prioritized over psychological truth. Comfort over integrity. Belonging over selfhood. And the price is a generation of individuals who feel deeply disconnected from their own existence. Yet beneath this collapse, something else stirs. A tension, a resistance, a silent awareness that something is wrong. That approval should not dictate being. That acceptance should not define existence. That identity should not require permission. This awareness grows slowly, painfully. It emerges in moments of profound dissatisfaction, in quiet despair, in emotional exhaustion, in the realization that no amount of recognition ever feels enough. And in that realization, the performance begins to crack. But cracking is dangerous, because once you glimpse the cost of approval, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice every compromise, every small betrayal, every moment you choose safety over truth. And this awareness creates unbearable internal conflict. You are torn between belonging and being, between acceptance and authenticity, between comfort and integrity. And the mind, unable to reconcile these forces, enters crisis. This is where transformation begins, not as liberation, but as destruction. Because the false identity must collapse before anything real can emerge. And collapse is never gentle. It is violent. It strips away illusions. It exposes emptiness. It dismantles self-deception. It leaves you raw, vulnerable, unprotected. And in that state, you stand alone with your unfiltered consciousness, facing the terrifying freedom of existing without approval. Most retreat at this threshold. They rebuild the mask. They return to performance. They choose familiar suffering over uncertain freedom. But some step forward. Not toward clarity but toward chaos. Because only through chaos can reconstruction occur. Only through isolation can self-definition begin. Only through detachment from approval can true identity surface. And yet, even at this edge, doubt lingers. Fear whispers, what if without approval you disappear? What if without belonging you dissolve? What if the self you seek does not exist? What if there is nothing beneath the mask? That question hangs unanswered in the darkness, pressing against the mind, waiting for the next fracture, the next loss, the next moment of unbearable pressure to force a choice that will change everything. Emotion is movement. Power is stillness. Where emotion surges, power waits. Where reaction explodes, control evaporates. The world teaches you to express, to vent, to release, to react, to defend, to justify. It teaches you that emotion is honesty, that expression is health, that reaction is authenticity. But beneath that comforting narrative lies a brutal reality. Emotion exposes position. It reveals weakness. It announces intention. It broadcasts vulnerability. And in a world driven by dominance, hierarchy, and survival instincts, whatever can be read can be used. Whatever can be used can be controlled. Power does not need volume. It does not require performance. It does not seek validation. Power occupies the space left behind when emotion withdraws. When anger retreats, clarity advances. When fear recedes, perception sharpens. When desire quiets, calculation emerges. Power is not force. It is leverage. It is the ability to act without internal resistance, to move without internal conflict, to decide without emotional distortion. Emotion complicates. Power simplifies. Emotion floods. Power focuses. Most people live inside emotional turbulence. They react before they understand. They speak before they think. They decide before they observe. Their inner world is loud, chaotic, impulsive. And because of this noise, their perception is blurred. They misread situations. They misjudge people. They mistake emotional intensity for truth. They confuse passion with purpose. And in that confusion, they become predictable. Predictability is vulnerability. Vulnerability is opportunity. Opportunity is power, but only for those who remain still enough to see it. When emotion retreats, something unsettling happens. Time slows. Perception widens. Patterns emerge. You begin to notice micro-expressions, hesitations, tone shifts, behavioral inconsistencies. You see the subtle cracks beneath confident facades. You sense insecurity beneath arrogance. You detect fear beneath aggression. You feel dishonesty beneath charm. Emotion blocks this perception because it narrows focus to the self. Stillness expands awareness outward. And in that expansion, power reveals itself. The emotionally driven mind seeks relief. It wants resolution, closure, expression. It wants the tension to end. The detached mind seeks information. It wants data, understanding, advantage. It wants the tension to speak, because tension exposes truth. People reveal themselves under pressure. They leak intention through stress. They betray strategy through discomfort. And the one who remains emotionally withdrawn becomes the observer, not the participant. They stand outside the storm, watching its mechanics. And in understanding those mechanics, they gain control over them. Power is not dominance through force. It is dominance through positioning. It is the ability to remain unaffected while others destabilize themselves. It is the capacity to wait while others rush. It is the discipline to withhold while others overshare. It is the restraint to observe while others perform. Power accumulates silently, built from patience, awareness, and emotional neutrality. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It does not seek validation. It simply waits for leverage. When emotion retreats, ego weakens. And ego is the primary enemy of power. Ego craves recognition. It needs acknowledgement. It seeks affirmation. It demands respect. And because of this need, it becomes manipulable. Insult provokes reaction. Praise creates compliance. Comparison breeds insecurity. Ego is easily provoked, easily steered, easily exploited. The emotionally detached mind operates beyond ego. It does not seek to win attention. It seeks to win positioning. It does not seek to dominate visibly. It seeks to dominate structurally. This is why silence unsettles and emotional restraint intimidates. Not because they signal superiority, but because they signal independence from emotional influence. When you do not react, you do not provide emotional access. When you do not express, you do not reveal leverage points. When you do not seek validation, you cannot be controlled through it. And when you cannot be controlled, you become unpredictable. Unpredictability disrupts power structures. It destabilizes hierarchies. It creates uncertainty. And uncertainty breeds caution. Caution shifts dynamics. Emotionally driven individuals seek connection. They seek agreement. They seek harmony. They seek belonging. These desires make them cooperative, compliant, negotiable. Emotionally detached individuals seek clarity. They seek advantage. They seek autonomy. These desires make them independent, strategic, untethered. They are not easily persuaded, not easily pressured, not easily manipulated. Their decisions are not driven by fear of rejection or hunger for acceptance. They are driven by calculation, by outcome, by long-term positioning. This difference is subtle, yet it shapes entire destinies. In environments of competition, emotion becomes liability. In systems of power, detachment becomes necessity. Leaders who react emotionally lose authority. Negotiators who reveal emotion lose leverage. Strategists who allow emotion to dictate choices lose foresight. Emotion clouds judgment. It distorts perception. It narrows options. Power demands clarity, and clarity requires emotional withdrawal. But this withdrawal is not numbness. It is control. It is the deliberate suspension of reaction to allow observation. It is the capacity to feel without being governed by feeling. It is the mastery of inner impulses. You do not eliminate emotion. You regulate it. You contain it. You discipline it. You allow it to inform without allowing it to command. And in that discipline, power consolidates. The emotionally detached individual moves differently. Their presence is slower. Their speech is measured. Their reactions are minimal. They do not rush to fill silence. They do not scramble to defend their image. They do not chase validation. They do not compete for attention. This restraint creates gravity. Others adjust their behavior around them. They speak more carefully. They reveal more. They hesitate more. They calculate more. Because they sense that this individual is not playing the same emotional game. And that difference shifts dynamics. Emotion is contagious. So is calm. But calm is more destabilizing. Because it forces others to confront their own emotional volatility. In the presence of emotional restraint, reactive individuals feel exposed. Their impulsiveness becomes obvious. Their insecurity becomes visible. Their neediness becomes uncomfortable. And this discomfort drives them to either withdraw or overcompensate. Both reactions provide information. Both create leverage. Power operates through asymmetry. When one party is emotionally invested and the other is not, imbalance forms. The emotionally invested one seeks resolution. The detached one can withhold it. The invested one seeks closure. The detached one can delay it. The invested one fears loss. The detached one can tolerate it. And tolerance of loss is the ultimate source of leverage. Because when you can walk away, you cannot be controlled. When you need to stay, you can. This is why detachment terrifies. It signals independence from emotional dependency. It suggests that you are not anchored to the same fears, desires, and attachments as others. It implies that you operate on a different axis. And difference threatens stability. Those who cannot influence you emotionally cannot predict you. Those who cannot predict you cannot control you. Those who cannot control you begin to fear you. Yet this path carries a hidden cost. Emotional retreat creates psychological distance. Distance creates isolation. Isolation creates introspection. And introspection reveals uncomfortable truths. You begin to see human interaction stripped of its romantic illusions. You see ambition disguised as kindness. You see insecurity masked as confidence. You see manipulation cloaked in charm. You see fear hiding beneath aggression. And once you see these patterns, innocence disappears. Trust becomes cautious. Connection becomes conditional. Relationships become strategic. This awareness sharpens perception but dulls empathy. You understand motives but feel less moved by them. You recognize pain but respond less emotionally. You observe suffering but intervene less impulsively. And in this detachment, moral ambiguity emerges. You begin to question whether compassion is strength or vulnerability, whether forgiveness is wisdom or weakness, whether emotional connection is fulfillment or liability. These questions have no simple answers, and the longer you remain in detachment, the heavier they become. Power isolates. It separates you from emotional consensus. You no longer react as others do. You no longer value what others value. You no longer fear what others fear. And this divergence creates loneliness. Not because you lack company, but because you lack resonance. Conversations feel superficial. Emotional exchanges feel scripted. Social rituals feel performative. You become an observer in spaces designed for participants. And this observational existence breeds a quiet alienation. But within this alienation, clarity intensifies. You begin to see how emotion governs mass behavior, how outrage can mobilize crowds, how fear can shape policy, how desire can drive consumption, how insecurity can fuel competition. You see how narratives manipulate perception, how symbols evoke loyalty, how language frames reality. And in seeing these mechanisms, you recognize how easily human emotion can be steered, how quickly people surrender autonomy in exchange for emotional comfort. Power structures rely on this. They manufacture emotional environments. They cultivate fear, hope, pride, anger. They trigger emotional responses to guide behavior. They design narratives to shape perception. And those immersed in emotion follow. Those who retreat from emotion observe. And observers gain advantage, because they are not swept by emotional tides. They navigate them. Emotion is velocity. Power is direction. Velocity without direction leads nowhere. Direction without velocity controls movement. When emotion retreats, intention sharpens. You become selective, precise, calculated. You do not waste energy on reaction. You conserve it for action. You do not dissipate attention on emotional noise. You focus it on opportunity. This conservation creates momentum. And momentum, guided by clarity, builds dominance. Yet there is danger in prolonged detachment. Emotional withdrawal can calcify into emotional suppression. Suppression breeds numbness. Numbness breeds apathy. And apathy erodes purpose. You begin to move without feeling. You act without connection. You achieve without satisfaction. You dominate without fulfillment. And in this hollow success, existential questions emerge. What is power without meaning? What is control without connection? What is mastery without belonging? These questions haunt the emotionally detached, because while power increases, emotional resonance diminishes. You gain influence but lose intimacy. You gain authority but lose warmth. You gain control but lose surrender. And the human psyche, no matter how disciplined, still craves connection, still longs for recognition, still seeks understanding. The suppression of these needs does not eliminate them. It buries them. And buried needs resurface in unexpected ways. Some become hyper-ambitious, chasing power to fill emotional voids. Some become nihilistic, dismissing emotional fulfillment as illusion. Some become manipulative, using others' emotions to simulate connection. Some retreat into isolation, avoiding emotional entanglement altogether. Each path reflects the same struggle, reconciling power with humanity. But in the realm of dominance, emotion must retreat, because emotion seeks relief, not advantage. Emotion seeks expression, not positioning. Emotion seeks comfort, not control. And control, in the brutal architecture of reality, determines outcome. Those who master emotional withdrawal gain access to strategic clarity. They see beyond immediate gratification. They calculate long-term consequences. They resist impulsive decisions. They endure discomfort for future leverage. This endurance separates those who react from those who rule. The reactive mind lives moment to moment. The strategic mind operates across timelines. The reactive mind seeks to feel better now. The strategic mind seeks to be stronger later. The reactive mind values emotional relief. The strategic mind values positional advantage. And this difference shapes destinies. Power moves where emotion retreats because emotion anchors attention to the self. Detachment frees attention to the system. You stop asking how you feel and start asking what is happening. You stop prioritizing comfort and start prioritizing awareness. You stop seeking validation and start seeking leverage. And in this shift, your relationship with reality transforms. You no longer exist inside events. You exist above them. Yet this elevation is unstable, because the higher you rise above emotional engagement, the farther you drift from human warmth. You become effective but distant, influential but isolated, respected but unknown, feared but unloved. And in the silence of this dominance, a new tension forms. A tension between control and connection, between mastery and meaning, between power and purpose. That tension deepens with time. It whispers questions in moments of solitude. It surfaces during late hours when ambition rests and introspection awakens. It asks whether power is liberation or imprisonment, whether detachment is freedom or exile, whether emotional restraint is mastery or self-denial. These questions do not weaken power. They complicate it. They add weight to it. They make it heavy to carry. Because power is not light. It is burden. It is responsibility. It is isolation. It is vigilance. It is restraint. It is constant calculation. And the more you understand its mechanics, the less innocent it becomes. You see how easily it can be abused, how subtly it can corrupt, how quietly it can dehumanize. And this awareness introduces a new danger, the erosion of empathy. Without empathy, power becomes predatory. Without emotional resonance, others become objects, variables, instruments. And once people become instruments, morality dissolves. Utility replaces compassion. Efficiency replaces dignity. Outcome replaces humanity. This is the abyss beneath emotional detachment. The point where control becomes cruelty, where dominance becomes dehumanization. Standing at this edge, you sense the precarious balance. Retreat too far from emotion and you lose humanity. Engage too deeply and you lose power. The tension between these forces defines the path of those who seek mastery. There is no equilibrium, only constant adjustment, only vigilant self-observation, only relentless discipline. And so you walk this narrow line, withdrawing emotion to gain clarity, allowing feeling to retain humanity, controlling reaction to maintain leverage, allowing empathy to preserve meaning. This balance is fragile, easily disrupted, and each disruption leaves scars. Each miscalculation costs something. Each step forward demands sacrifice.